Hello, all, and welcome. In this podcast series, we have been exploring onboarding through three distinct lenses: the organization, the job, and the culture. In our last episode, we talked with Susan Minaya, COO and Chief Learning Strategist of Minaya Learning Global Solutions, about onboarding to the job. And today, we'll hear from Susan again as we focus on onboarding employees to the culture. Stay tuned to learn more. Hello, Susan. Welcome back.
Thanks, Dario. I'm so glad to be back one more time.
One more time. Yes, one more to go. Now, this time focusing on the last lens, on culture. So let's kick off the conversation. What makes culture onboarding different than organization or job onboarding like we've discussed previously?
Well, I would say that culture onboarding isn't a single event. It's an evolution. And so that suggests time, right? That's something that unfolds over time. And it really begins actually with recruiting, where your new hire has already been getting all socialized with the organization's culture. At least we hope they are, if marketing and HR are doing their jobs. This is what I like to call overt culture. These things that they're hearing before they come into the organization. You know, it's grounded in a company's mission, their vision, their values, those statements that say we believe, really, and declaring that the way we work. And I don't say that in a facetious way, but these are just very overt things that organizations signal out to attract talent, right? So think of an iceberg. We use this imagery a lot for a lot of different things in learning and development. But if you think of an iceberg, you would really associate this type of culture with what's visible or above the waterline. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So any culture and their employees will also tell you that there's also the other culture, right? The culture that's kind of quiet, the culture that's not overt. It's what you experience once you get into the organization. And that's the culture that I would say is kind of below the waterline and really outside of the PR and social media lens that gets broadcast out to the broader world. So it shows up in how employees interact with one another, how customers are treated, kind of like what we say about them or how we interact with them, like how inclusive the organization is in general. It is or it isn't or sort of is. Their tolerance for innovation. Some companies are very tolerant of innovation. Other ones are kind of want to stay the course, stay in the lane, which is fine. And then creating a safe space to speak up, right? Have different opinions. People listen to the employees, right? So if they value continuous learning so that I know I can grow in my career and view mistakes as really learning opportunities, how the organization might engage maybe in the community or social responsibility that they have. I worked for an organization that was huge in the community, and it was just so much a part of who we were. Like everybody was so on board. We loved that work. We wore our t-shirts. We got out there. We were doing something every quarter to be visible in the community because it mattered to the people that were there, and all the employees got to choose the things that they worked on with the community. So that's an example of culture.
It is interesting how you describe that. It smacks of DE&I. Yet, having worked in many different places, I get the gist of what you're talking about. So how do you onboard employees to a culture? It seems so intangible yet tangible all at the same time.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's kind of nebulous, right? That's a word you can use. So it's a really good question. The word I put back at you for this is purposefully, right? There are components of organizational culture that an organization wants to instill in new employees, and creating the roadmap to expose the new employees to those culture elements is a great way to do that. So for instance, don't just leave culture awareness to chance. Be extremely intentional for it. And leaders have so much ownership for nurturing the right culture. So a lot of the intentional things are kind of in their court for them to architect for their new employees. For example, if inclusion is an important part of the organization's culture, then make sure that they have experience where they feel comfortable and part of the organization right out of the gate. While they may be new, maybe in team meetings, for example, be sure to ask their perspective to allow them an opportunity to contribute rather than just listening to everyone else, which often happens when there's someone new to a group. If you sat in team meetings, you're the new guy, you sort of sit there while everybody else is chatting. So, you invite them in to give a perspective.
Yeah.
And then I think if the organization has employee resource groups or business resource groups, be sure to introduce the employee to these internal organizations. This allows them to get connected, feel a level of comfort in those groups, and also further foster a sense of belonging and inclusion. Hey, there's other people here that are like me. I feel great. I feel like I belong. and it's an opportunity for them. So those are great opportunities. And you talked about DE&I kind of being wrapped up in this culture piece. Well, it kind of is, those things are sort of go together. And organizations that use onboarding buddies or navigators are usually pretty successful with them. But you should also really take these roles very seriously and ensure that you properly prepare the existing employee who you're asking to perform these roles so that they understand what you're expecting from them, what they need to emphasize with the new employee, kind of establish the code of conduct, if you will, type of level setting, so that they're helping to kind of create and communicate the culture that you want them to be aware of. I often hear when working with clients the stories about once an employee leaves training, they get to the job and the leader or coworker says, well, that's all well and good, but that's really not the way things are done around here, right? So this is essentially, from my point of view, it's sabotage, really, because the organization needs to be vigilant to realign this type of a situation when it's happening in the organization. These are culture killers, right? We spend the time to train people certain ways, and when they get to the job, and then we say, never mind that. That's sending a really interesting message.
That's a strong
to
disconnect.
the employees. And so that's something really, in my opinion, that should not be tolerated. And so from a performance management perspective, I think leaders who are part of those departments or whatever that oversee the group, that's a conversation that should be had there, right? Because it really does undermine the organization. And it doesn't stop really unless somebody says, stop. That's not okay.
Yeah, so it seems there isn't really training around cultural onboarding. It's really more experiential.
Well, I think it's more experiential. You could talk about our culture is this. So in some cases, and probably the initial day one on the job type of orientation or onboarding, there could be things about kind of the way we are. This is the culture here. So there can be a component of that. But I think for the longer duration of the 365 days of kind of onboarding, which I'm an advocate for looking at it like that, that it's a very nebulous thing, and it's something that can keep people with you or drive them away, right?
Yeah. Wow. Anything else essential for onboarding? I mean, this is the last topic in this series, so.
Yeah, well, I guess in closing, I would just say that onboarding is essential to employee engagement and retention. I mean, for me, it's like it's worth organizations really making sure that they get this right, So when you look at onboarding to the organization, it's essential for validation for the employee that they made the right decision to come and work for you, right? From a structured onboarding to the job, this really just creates a sense of psychological safety, a sense of purpose and belonging, because the new employee understands what's my role, what's expected of me, who do I work with, and what's the timeline in which things need to happen. And an intentional culture onboarding is really a powerful tool for engagement and actually fostering the culture that you want, right? If you get enough new people coming in and this is the culture that we're kind of really ramping people into, then it helps foster that culture even more. And I think, remember, it isn't an event, it is an evolution. And this, again, as I said at the beginning, suggests time and attention, right? So these are my experiences and observations of onboarding. And really, there's so much information available on this topic out there for people. And my guidance would be, to keep learning about it. Use what works for you and your organization and what you're trying to accomplish, and ignore what doesn't work for you. There's some very great companies that this is all they do is the culture building piece, but there's just a lot of great information that people share in white papers or things like that can help you see what might be something we would want to try. And, really, onboarding is not a once and done effort. It should be a strategy for the organization. It really ought to be one of the strategies for the organization. Because why? Because it forces them to look at what they're doing year over year and question, is it still valid? Does something need to change? Is this not working so well anymore because this has changed in our external environment or our internal environment? So it forces you, when it is a strategy, to really continue to pay attention to it, keeps it on the leaderboard for performance measurement, right? And I think, it's just important work. And I'm happy to say that Minaya Learning Global Solutions, we specialize in onboarding. So I appreciate the opportunity to share my passion for number one and my perspectives on this topic with you, Dario. So thank you.
Of course. And thank you so much for sharing. You shared a lot of great insights for the job, the organization, and the culture. So, I mean, I've definitely learned a lot and gained a little bit better understanding. This concludes our podcast series on onboarding, focusing on the organization, the job, and the culture. We hope you gained some insights. Until next time.